Hey, hello again, guys. Let's very quickly cover the Indian Removal Act and the scenario at play here. So, first, if you guys want to know more about the how the other branches interact with the Supreme Court, I recommend that you do some research on Abraham Lincoln when he suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. That got pretty contentious. He even threatened to arrest a Supreme Court justice. So that's a really fun. The other one was Governor Wallace when he makes a stand against the Brown versus Board of Education decision. He didn't want to integrate schools, so he made a symbolic stand that ultimately failed. It failed to stop the schools from integrating. Right, the courts won out against Wallace in that case. So two very interesting cases. And if you get a question like on the exam, like for example, what could the states do if they disagree? What action can a state take if they do not like a Supreme Court decision? Well, they could just ignore the decision, just like the federal government, just like the president can or anybody else. So, with that case, let's begin. Now we talk about states ignoring decisions of Supreme Courts. That in part is what happened here, because really, the Indian Removal Act was simply the federal government authorizing the land that is today Oklahoma to be used for resettling Native Americans. That's really all the act did. The real issue here was what Andrew Jackson was doing was he was paving the way for those states, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, to remove the natives that were living in their territory, right? So this is the basic contemporary situation. There's a question about whether or not whites can coexist with Native Americans. And overwhelmingly, the response was no from the average American. They were thought to just be too uncivilized, too different, and people wanted them out. Overwhelmingly, people wanted them out. So the problem with that was that leading up to that time, there were a series of treaties and agreements that were reached with them that gave them permission to stay. Now, Georgia did not consider the native tribes to be sovereign, right? They were living within the territory of Georgia. Therefore, they saw them as subjects of Georgia, right? And they even had segregation, like what would be considered segregation laws, where they had to stay in their place and the whites could not go in there, the natives could not leave there. So they're really, the fact that they felt like they can make those laws just shows that they saw the natives as being subject to their rule, right? So Georgia passes a law that basically says we're going to remove the Native Americans, right? The United States, or there were some people in the United States who did not agree with that, and in particular Henry Clay, who we're going to meet later in another scenario that we're going to visit. Henry Clay really dislikes Andrew Jackson, and he wants to see Andrew Jackson fail whenever he can. So he solicits the help of the previous Attorney General to represent the Cherokee Nation against the state of Georgia. So, and the basic argument is this: Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution states that states are not allowed to make agreements with foreign nations. That's the job of the federal government. So Georgia is in violation of the Constitution in trying to do this. It seems pretty clear from the historical record that they were correct. But the Supreme Court, this is an important, interesting note to make here, under John Marshall, who's still the Supreme Court Justice, appointed by the second president, Jackson, I believe, is the seventh, and he's still there. He rules on the side of Georgia. So, everybody thinks that the case is settled until a second case gets brought up, where there's a white missionary living within their territory. You remember that I was talking about those segregation laws? Well, this white missionary living within the state of Georgia was violating those laws. He's living with the natives, and he's not supposed to do that. So he gets sentenced in the state of Georgia to 4 years hard labor, which is something that they, we're still doing, breaking big rocks into little rocks. He petitions the case. It goes to the Supreme Court. And this time, the Supreme Court rules differently. They decide that the state of Georgia is violating the Constitution, and that the actions the United States have taken previously towards the Cherokee tribe cannot be seen as anything other than treating them as a sovereign nation. Right? So basically he says, yes, they are a sovereign nation, therefore the law that Georgia passed was unconstitutional. And I think he even used the word reprehensible to the Constitution. But in deciding that, they reversed the decision. So now they set the precedent that all laws that Georgia passes, including laws that would remove the natives from their land, all laws are unconstitutional, right? So they can't do that anymore. Well, remember that Andrew Jackson is in support. He passes, he gets Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act so that Georgia could do this, right? And when Marshall goes ahead and does that, rules against Georgia in favor of this white missionary, but really in favor of the natives. Then he takes matters into his own hands. So he mobilizes the United States military to go to Georgia and forcibly remove the natives from that land. And in a famous quote, he says, Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Of course, we know that from Federal Order 78, that there is no enforcement mechanism in the Supreme Court. So we see that play out here, right? Andrew Jackson mobilizes the military, forcibly removes them, and the Supreme Court, along with everybody who disagrees, has to just sit back and watch. Because the state of Georgia, along with Andrew Jackson, go ahead and they defy the court order and force the natives out, right? So that's pretty much it. What we got to think about now is, Congress does play a role. So think about the role that Congress plays. Think about why this decision went differently than the Marbury versus Madison case. Why is the executive in this situation able to get away with all this? Why is he able to get away with ignoring the court order? It seems radical, right? But he does it, and nobody really steps up to stop him. Congress doesn't step up. Nobody else. But if you remember, Congress did pass the law, right? So Jackson going into this already understands Congress has my back. I know that Congress is going to support me. I know the state of Georgia supports me, right? So there are a lot of factors here. So I'll go ahead and leave it there. If you guys have any questions, of course, you could always email me. But have a great evening, and I'll see you guys later.